So I want you to just imagine for a second that you're in a tiny wooden boat.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, right. Just a tiny, fragile boat on this freezing, pitch-black sea. You're miles and miles away from the safety of the shoreline.
And it's cold.
It is so bitterly cold, the wind is just biting right through your clothes.
Mm.
And beneath you, beneath the boat, is a depth that you really can't even fathom. It's just an abyss.
Right.
And then suddenly, the water starts to lift. The surface of the ocean just breaks. And this creature, a creature larger than anything you have ever seen in your entire life, just rises up right beside you.
It's a terrifying thought, honestly.
Yeah, it really is. And in that single massive exhale, that one giant breath of the whale, there is just this profound awe. I mean, there's primal fear, obviously.
Absolutely.
But depending on who is actually holding the oars in that boat, there is also hunger, there's money, ritual, and a lot of violence.
Yeah, a tremendous amount of violence.
So today, we are taking a deep dive into the really epic, bloody, and honestly beautiful saga of humanity and the whale. We've got this huge stack of sources we're looking at today.
You really do.
Yeah, we've got historical records, we've got the latest biological research, and some really deep cultural analyses. And our mission today is to understand how this magnificent creature, how it was never really just an animal to us.
No, it was so much more than that.
Right. It was like a moving continent. It was quite literally a source of light for our cities. It was a plastic of early fashion, a mythological terror that just haunted our literature. And
But this is the really critical part, I think.
Yeah.
It became this ultimate mirror. It reflects human ambition, but also, hopefully, our capacity for restraint.
Yes, exactly. So, okay, let's unpack this, because to really understand how humans eventually cast a shadow over the entire ocean, we have to talk about the deep history of what these creatures actually are.
We do. We have to go way back.
Because everyone knows they aren't fish, right? They are mammals. But the actual mechanics of how they got into the ocean in the first place it's just mind-bending.
It completely forces you to reevaluate how you think evolution even works.
Right.
Because over 50 million years ago, the ancestors of modern whales were terrestrial mammals. They lived on the land.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is.
Yeah.
We are talking about creatures that are actually related to early even-toed ungulates. So think of the ancient relatives of hippos or deer or even pigs.
So like a deer.
Basically, yeah. They were walking around on four legs. They were breathing air, giving live birth. And over millions of years, they made this incredibly slow, seemingly impossible evolutionary climb back into the sea.
See, I always get stuck trying to visualize the actual physics of that transition.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
Because going from the land back to the ocean isn't just about, learning to swim a little better.
No, not at all.
You are trading your terrestrial legs for flippers, which means you have to completely change your entire skeletal structure.
Exactly.
And you're trading a reliance on scent, which, works great in the air for a reliance on sound.
Because light and smell just do not travel well once you get deep into the ocean.
Right. And you're trading the solid, predictable pull of gravity for the fluid dynamics of buoyancy. It's a total teardown and rebuild.
The structural remodeling of their bodies is staggering, honestly. When you look at the fossil record, you see these intermediate animals like Pacatus. Yeah, which was basically this wolf-sized waiting animal, like a giant, strange dog that hung out in the shallows.
Okay.
And then over millions of years, you see the pelvis actually detach from the spine.
Wait, it detaches completely?
Yes, and it does that so the tail can move up and down in that really powerful fluke motion that whales have, rather than side to side like a fish.
Oh, that makes sense, because fish swim side to side.
Exactly. Mammals, because of our spines, naturally flex up and down. Think of a cheetah running.
Right.
So the hind limbs, they just vanish entirely into the body wall. You don't need them anymore. And the nostrils, this is the crazy part, the nostrils literally migrate generation by generation from the front of the snout all the way to the top of the head.
To become the blowhole.
Exactly. To become blowholes, which allows them to breathe without having to lift their entire massively heavy heads out of the water every time they need air.
That is just incredible. And this evolutionary path eventually splits, right? It splits into the two main branches that we see today.
Right. You have the baleen whales on one side and the toothed whales on the other.
And that split really defines how they interact with the entire ocean.
It does. The toothed whales, or the odontocetes, they include the sperm whales, the belugas, narwhals, and orcas. They went the route of active, high-speed hunting.
Like predators chasing down prey.
Exactly. They target fish, they target squid, and even other marine mammals using their teeth. And because they are hunting these really fast-moving prey in what is essentially a pitch-black abyss, they had to develop something special.
Echolocation.
Yes, echolocation. They produce these really high-frequency clicks in their nasal passages,
Uh-huh.
and then they focus those sound waves through this big, bulbous mass of fatty tissue in their foreheads. It's called the melon.
The melon. I love that name.
It's very descriptive. So they send the sound out through the melon, and they essentially see their environment through the returning echoes.
Which is an incredible mechanism all on its own, like biological sonar.
Exactly like sonar.
But the other branch, the baleen whales, the mysticetes, that one always seemed a little counterintuitive to me.
How so?
Well, these are the blue whales, the humpbacks, the bowheads, the absolute giants.
Yeah.
And instead of teeth, they have these massive, flexible plates hanging from their upper jaws.
Right, the baleen.
Made of keratin, right?
Yeah.
The same stuff as our fingernails. And the sources mentioned they use this baleen to just filter tiny prey out of the water, like krill and copepods. But wait, I really don't fully understand the math there.
The math of their diet.
Yeah, because copepods are tiny crustaceans, right?
Yeah.
We were talking about microscopic zooplankton.
Very, very small.
So how does an animal weighing hundreds of thousands of pounds sustain itself by eating something the size of a grain of rice? It just doesn't seem mathematically possible.
Well, you have to look at the mechanics of their feeding strategies.
Yeah.
Because they are violently energetic. They don't just, passively swim around with their mouths open hoping bugs fly in.
Right. Okay.
Take lunge feeding, for example. This is what rorqual whales, like the blue whale and the humpback, use. They accelerate to really high speeds underwater.
Oh, wow.
And then they open their mouths to near 90-degree angles. And their throat pleats, they have these grooves along their throats, they expand outward like a massive underwater parachute.
That is terrifying.
In a matter of seconds, they engulf a volume of water that is actually larger than their own body mass.
Are you serious? A volume larger than their own body? That sounds like slamming into a brick wall of water. The drag forces must be astronomical.
Oh, they are. The drag literally brings this massive speeding animal to a near-dead stop in the water almost instantly.
Ouch!
Yeah. But then, using their massive tongues, they basically they force all that water back out through the baleen plates. And that traps millions of krill or copepods inside the mouth.
Just straining it out.
Exactly. And other species have different methods. Like humpbacks, they engineer their environment. They blow these really elaborate nets of bubbles from deep below to basically corral schools of fish into a tight little cylinder.
A net made of air.
Yes. And then they just lunge straight up through the middle of it with their mouths open.
That's so smart.
And gray whales, they actually roll over on their sides right on the seafloor, and they just suction up the mud, filtering out all the little benthic organisms hiding in the dirt.
But even with those efficient feeding methods, I'm still stuck on the scale of these animals. Why did they get so unbelievably massive? Like, why not just stay the size of a shark?
Well, what's fascinating here is that modern baleen whales didn't actually become these gigantic oceanic titans until relatively recently. I mean, in evolutionary terms.
Really? I assume they were always huge.
No, not at all. For tens of millions of years, baleen whales were much, much smaller. They were roughly the size of a modern minivan.
A minivan? That's tiny compared to a blue whale.
Exactly. The shift to gigantism happened only about 5.3 million years ago, right around the Miocene-Pliocene transition.
Okay, so what exactly happened 5.3 million years ago to just supersize a whale? Did the food change?
Tectonic plates shifted. The Isthmus of Panama basically closed up, which physically cut off the connection between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans.
Oh, wow. So that just blocked the water flow.
Yes, it fundamentally rewired the global ocean currents. And that triggered massive upwellings.
Upwellings.
Deep, freezing, extremely nutrient-rich water being driven from the ocean floor all the way up to the surface, mostly along the coastlines.
Okay, so the water gets richer.
Right. And when those deep nutrients hit the sunlight at the surface, you get explosive, hyper-concentrated blooms of phytoplankton.
And the microscopic plants.
Yes. Which in turn feed massive, super dense swarms of krill. Suddenly, the food wasn't just evenly distributed throughout the ocean anymore.
Oh, I see.
It was highly concentrated in very specific seasonal patches, usually way up near the poles.
So the food is incredibly dense now. But you have to travel thousands and thousands of miles to get to it before the season ends and the ice freezes over.
Precisely. To survive in this new version of the ocean, you needed a body capable of storing massive amounts of energy. You had to survive that long, empty journey between the feeding grounds.
Right.
And you needed a mouth big enough to harvest an unbelievable amount of calories in a very, very short window once you finally arrived. The environment itself demanded gigantism. They became massive vaults of stored energy in the form of blubber.
Wow. Okay, but wait, I'm stuck on the math of their survival again here.
Okay, lay it on me.
If they are these giant air-breathing mammals, and they have this really slow reproductive cycle, I mean, the sources say they usually have just one calf at a time every few years.
Yes, that's right.
Mathematically, that species should have been wiped out by oceanic predators millions of years ago. A single calf is a very high-risk evolutionary strategy if there are giant sharks swimming around.
You'd think so, but you're looking at them like they're normal prey. You have to look at them as mobile fortresses.
Mobile fortresses.
Yes. Their sheer size became an almost impenetrable defense. When you weigh 150 to 200 tons, like an adult blue whale does, there is virtually nothing in the entire ocean that can threaten you.
Because you're just too big to bite.
Exactly. Now, a pod of orcas might harass a young calf, but a healthy adult whale is basically untouchable.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, their blubber wasn't just there for energy storage, it was thermal armor. It allowed them to dive into freezing depths where cold-blooded predators, like the big sharks, simply couldn't follow them because they'd freeze to death.
That is brilliant. But unfortunately, that fortress, that massive vault of stored energy, the hundreds of tons of blubber and muscle, is exactly what eventually put a massive target on their backs.
Sadly, yes.
The evolutionary success that protected them from the sharks is what ultimately drew human eyes from the shoreline out to the horizon.
Right.
But long before we were building massive commercial fleets to hunt them, our relationship started much, much closer to home.
It did. The earliest human interactions with whales weren't out on the open ocean. They were right on the beaches.
With the stranded ones.
Yes. For early coastal communities, a beached or stranded whale wasn't this terrifying animal they had to go out and risk their lives to conquer. It was a windfall, a miracle almost.
It literally just washed up.
It simply arrived on the tide, and it provided this staggering, localized abundance of resources all at once.
The archaeological evidence for this is just wild. Because a single animal could provide thousands of pounds of meat. It provided fat for oil, giant bones that could be used for structural building.
Baleen for binding things together.
Right. Sinew for cordage. The source materials actually point out that there is evidence of indigenous groups in what is now present-day Brazil utilizing whales 5,000 years ago.
It's ancient, and as those coastal communities grew more sophisticated over time, they transitioned. They went from passive scavenging of beached whales to active, organized subsistence whaling.
Going out and getting them.
Yes. We see this with the Inuit hunting bowhead whales up in the high Arctic, or the Maka people hunting gray whales in the Pacific Northwest.
Right.
But we have to understand that this early hunting was profoundly different from the commercial whaling that we'll talk about later. In these subsistence cultures, the hunt was intensely communal. It was highly dangerous, and it was strictly regulated by spiritual and cultural protocols.
It makes me think of like a high-stakes, community-wide rope team trying to scale a really treacherous mountain.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah. If you are climbing a sheer cliff and you are all tied together on that rope, everyone has a very specific job. If one link breaks, the weather turns bad. If discipline fails on the boat, if the processing of the meat is botched once you get it back, the whole community fails.
Exactly.
If you screw up, people starve. It's life or death.
And in harsh environments like the Arctic, waste is not just inefficient, it is a profound arrogance.
Wow, yeah.
The whale was never considered inventory to be sold for profit. It was a shared community gift that was absolutely vital for winter survival.
So how do they actually do it? Because the mechanics of these early hunts reflect that intimate, really high-stakes relationship. They used umiaks, right?
Yes, umiaks, which are these lightweight open boat made of animal skins stretched tightly over driftwood or bone frames.
Just skin and bone boats.
Yes. And they approached these massive animals with nothing but hand-thrown harpoons.
Which just seems mathematically impossible to me. How does a guy standing in a little skin boat stop a 60-ton bowhead whale with a pointed stick?
Well, the harpoon wasn't actually designed to kill the whale outright. That's a common misconception.
Oh, really?
The harpoon head was designed to toggle, meaning once it pierced the skin, it would turn sideways inside the blubber so it wouldn't pull back out.
It locked in.
Exactly. And attached to that harpoon line were several inflated seal bladders.
Oh, I see. It's a drag mechanism.
Precisely. When the whale dived to try and escape, it had to drag these highly buoyant, air-filled bladders underwater against the immense hydrostatic pressure of the ocean.
Which takes a lot of energy.
A huge amount. It forced the whale to expend its oxygen reserves much, much faster. That forced it back to the surface sooner and exhausted the animal over many hours or even days until the hunters could safely approach with a killing lance to finish the hunt.
That requires an almost unfathomable amount of ecological knowledge. You aren't just looking for a spout on the horizon, you are reading the entire environment.
You have to read everything.
The sources mention the hunters reading the shifting patterns of the sea ice leads, tracking the changing of the ocean currents, even watching the activity of birds to locate where the whales might be surfacing.
And once the whale was secured and safely towed back to the village, the distribution of that animal was governed by really strict kinship rules.
You couldn't just take what you wanted.
No. The meat and the blubber, which is called muktuk in the Arctic, that was distributed to elders, to widows, and to families based on this very complex social safety net. Everyone was taken care of.
And nothing was wasted.
Nothing. The massive jawbones became the structural frames for their winter houses in landscapes where trees literally didn't exist.
That's amazing.
And for centuries, this balance held. The human population was small enough, and their hunting methods were limited enough that the ocean's ecosystem easily absorbed the pressure.
But blubber wasn't just a biological insulator for the whale or a source of winter calories for an indigenous hunter.
No, it was destined for much more.
To a 17th century merchant who was looking at the expanding global markets, blubber was essentially unrefined petroleum.
It was liquid gold.
Right. As human populations grew and mercantilism just exploded globally, the whale stopped being a means of local survival. It became a commodity.
And that changes everything. By the 17th and 18th centuries, the Basques, the Dutch, the British, and eventually the Americans, they turned whaling into this sprawling global maritime industry.
A massive industry.
Small coastal towns like Nantucket and New Bedford over in New England, they transformed almost overnight into some of the wealthiest ports on the entire planet because they were harvesting the primary fuel of the industrializing world.
Let's talk about the actual mechanics of that harvest because it's brutal.
It is very brutal.
The primary prize was the blubber, obviously, which they peeled off the whale in a process called flensing.
Right, flensing.
And flensing a whale in the open ocean is, it's basically like trying to peel an apple in a single continuous spiral strip.
That's a good way to picture it.
Except the apple weighs 80 tons. The knife you're using is on the end of a 15-foot pole. The apple is surrounded by ravenous sharks, and you are standing on a wooden boat pitching wildly in the ocean swells.
It sounds like a nightmare. It was incredibly dangerous, back-breaking labor. Once they peeled those massive strips of blubber, which they called blanket pieces, they hoisted them right up onto the deck of the ship.
Just hauling slabs of fat onto a wooden deck.
Yeah, and then the crew had to slice the blubber into thinner slices. They colloquially called these thin slices Bible leaves because they looked like the pages of a book. They did this to increase the surface area of the fat.
Okay, why do they need to do that?
Because these slices were then tossed into massive iron vats that were built directly onto brick furnaces on the deck of the ship. These were called the tripods.
Okay, wait. Boiling fat in an iron pot on a brick furnace on a wooden ship in the middle of the ocean. What could possibly go wrong there?
A lot, actually. Fires were a real danger. The heat from those furnaces rendered the lipid cells in the blubber, basically breaking them down into a liquid oil.
Right.
And they literally used the crispy leftover scraps of the boiled blubber as the fuel to keep the fires burning.
Wow. Self-sustaining fire.
Exactly. The ship just became this floating, smoke-choked factory. It smelled horrendous.
And that oil was lighting up the world. I mean, before kerosene or electricity, whale oil was the absolute premium illuminant for lamps in homes, for lighthouses, and for streetlights in places like London and Boston.
It was the best light you could buy.
It was also a highly stable lubricant, right? One that didn't freeze easily, which was totally crucial for greasing the really fast-moving gears of the textile mills as the Industrial Revolution geared up.
It literally kept the machines running. But the most highly prized substance wasn't the regular blubber. It was spermaceti.
Spermaceti. which
Ah,
was exclusively found in the heads of sperm whales.
only the sperm whales, yes.
Okay, wait. I have to ask, why does a sperm whale have a giant head filled with wax?
It's incredible, really. Biologically, the spermaceti organ serves a dual purpose for the whale.
Okay,
First, it acts as an incredible acoustic lens.
for the echolocation.
Exactly. The waxy oil actually changes density at different temperatures, allowing the whale to focus and magnify those high-frequency echolocation clicks we talked about earlier. They can use it to stun prey or navigate in the total abyss.
That is wild.
And second, it helps with buoyancy regulation during their extreme deep dives.
How does wax help them dive?
When they dive, they let cold ocean water enter their nasal passages. That cold water cools the spermaceti, turning it from a liquid oil into a very dense, solid wax.
Oh, and that makes their head heavier.
Exactly. It becomes a biological anchor, dragging them down to the depths without them having to swim as hard.
That is genius.
And when they want to surface, blood flow heats the wax back up, it melts, becomes lighter, and helps them rise.
That is just an absolute marvel of biological engineering. And the whalers realize this stuff made the best candles on Earth.
The absolute best. When harvested and refined, spermaceti produced the highest quality, brightest, and cleanest burning candles of the entire era.
Because they didn't smoke, right?
They didn't smoke, they didn't smell rancid like the cheap tallow candles made from cow fat, and they burned incredibly bright. It was the ultimate luxury product.
And then, on the other side of things, there was the baleen. We talked about how the filter feeders used it. But for 18th and 19th century high society, baleen was basically early plastic.
That's the best way to describe it. Because it is made of keratin, the same material as your fingernails, it has these remarkable physical properties. If
Oh.
you heat it with steam, you can bend and mold it into almost any shape. And when it cools, it retains that shape while remaining incredibly strong, flexible, and springy.
So it became the structural foundation for Victorian fashion and consumer goods. We are talking corset stays, the ribs of umbrellas, buggy whips, fishing rods, carriage springs, even the bristles on early typewriters.
It was everywhere.
It was inescapable.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where we see civilization doing what it so often does,
Yeah.
hiding its violence inside ordinary everyday objects. A beautifully structured ballroom corset in Paris, or an elegantly lit reading room in Philadelphia, was paid for by blood, choking black smoke, and terrifying labor thousands of miles away in the middle of the Pacific Ocean.
The consumer never had to smell the tripods burning.
Never. They just bought the candle.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because the actual physical act of catching these whales in the open boat era is terrifying. Imagine the scene for a second. They're sailing out into the deep ocean on wind-powered ships for years at a time.
Sometimes 3 or 4 years.
Someone in the rigging spots a spout. They lower these fragile 30-foot wooden whaleboats. 6 men row by hand right up to a breathing leviathan.
A creature that could crush them effortlessly.
Right. The harpooner stands up at the very bow of this tiny boat and throws a heavy iron harpoon by hand. And then all hell breaks loose with what they call the Nantucket sleigh ride.
The famous sleigh ride. We mentioned earlier that harpoons weren't meant to kill immediately. They were meant to tether the boat to the animal.
Right, like a fishing line.
Exactly. In the commercial era, once that harpoon struck, the panicked whale would dive or flee, taking the heavy manila rope with it. The rope would spin out of wooden tubs in the small boat so incredibly fast that the crew actually had to pour seawater on the wooden post it wrapped around the loggerhead just to keep the friction from setting the entire boat on fire.
So they're tethered to a 60-ton animal flying across the open ocean, just hoping the boat doesn't get pulled under or smashed to splinters by a wave.
It was sheer terror. They had to wait for the animal to exhaust itself from the drag and the blood loss, which could literally take hours.
Hours of being dragged.
Hours. And only then could they pull themselves hand over hand along the taut rope right up to the thrashing animal to deliver the final lethal strike to the lungs or heart with a long lance.
This is exactly why the sperm whale became the ultimate symbol of the terrifying deep ocean unknown.
Yes.
Because unlike the baleen whales, which generally just try to swim away, sperm whales had massive teeth and they fought back.
They absolutely fought back.
They were known to turn on the whaleboats, smashing them into pieces with their flukes or just crushing them in their huge jaws.
There are very famous historical accounts of this, like the sinking of the whale ship Essex back in 1820.
That's one that inspired Moby Dick, right?
Exactly. In that incident, a massive sperm whale intentionally rammed and sank the 238-ton mothership itself, leaving the crew stranded in the ocean. It's no wonder they were immortalized in myths and literature.
Melville's Moby Dick just captures that so perfectly.
The sperm whale represented the chaotic, completely untamable force of nature. Captain Ahab's obsession wasn't just about catching a single animal. It was a reflection of this driving, almost maddening human ambition to conquer the unconquerable, to extract wealth from an environment that was actively trying to kill them.
But despite all that ambition, that era of open boat whaling had built-in natural limitations.
It did. The ocean fought back.
Right. They were entirely constrained by the wind, by human muscle power, by the fragility of those wooden boats, and by the sheer, raw physical danger of the animal itself. If a whale was too fast, like the blue whale or the fin whale, which can swim upwards of 20 miles per hour, the guys in the rowboat simply couldn't catch it. Those super-fast species were basically immune to 19th century whaling.
The difficulty of the hunt provided a natural, physical buffer for the largest whale populations. But as we moved into the 20th century, the Industrial Revolution finally caught up to the ocean.
And it changed everything.
Humanity systematically erased every single one of those natural limits.
The era of mechanized slaughter. I read the stats on the technological lead here, and it is honestly chilling.
It is.
They replaced the sails with steam-powered catcher boats that could easily outrun a blue whale. They didn't lower rowboats anymore. They mounted heavy harpoon cannons directly onto the bows of the ships, and the harpoons themselves changed drastically.
They were no longer just heavy iron spears thrown by a guy with big muscles. These new cannons fired massive steel harpoons that were fitted with explosive penthrite grenades screwed right onto the tip.
Okay, how exactly does a penthrite grenade work in this context? That sounds like a weapon of war.
It basically is. Penthrite is a highly stable but incredibly powerful high explosive.
Okay.
The harpoon was designed with a time delay fuse. The heavy steel shaft would be fired from the cannon, and it would punch straight through the thick blubber and muscle deep into the whale's body cavity.
No,
And a split second later, the penthrite grenade would detonate internally.
that is horrific.
The expanding gas and the hydrostatic shock waves caused massive internal hemorrhaging and complete organ destruction. It was specifically designed to kill or critically incapacitate the animal almost instantly, which completely eliminated the dangerous hours-long struggle of the Nantucket sleigh ride.
So they just blew them up from the inside. And the processing changed too, right? They didn't have to tie the dead whale alongside the ship and risk sharks or storms while they peeled it anymore.
No, they bypassed that entirely. They built massive pelagic factory ships.
Factory shit.
These factory ships were essentially floating industrial slaughterhouses. They were designed with a massive slipway, a giant ramp built directly into the stern of the ship.
Oh, so they just pull them up inside.
Exactly. Giant steam winches would haul the entire 100-ton whale directly up out of the ocean, up the ramp, and onto the massive processing deck. An entire blue whale could be flensed, butchered, and boiled down to oil in less than an hour, entirely at sea.
And because they didn't have to return to a coastal port to process the whales, they could just stay out in the remote Antarctic waters for months at a time, just vacuuming up everything they saw.
Every single whale they crossed paths with?
The fast-swimming species that were previously safe, the blue whales, the fin whales, the sei whales, were suddenly fully exposed to the hunt. The numbers are staggering. Global whaling peaked in the 1960s.
And the devastation was absolute.
The sources estimate that modern commercial whaling reduced the entire blue whale population by 98.5%. They killed nearly 3 million whales in the 20th century alone.
3 million. From an analytical perspective, this represents a profound ethical and ecological shift.
How so?
Because hunting fundamentally transformed into pure extraction. When technology removed the friction, the unpredictable wind, the hard rowing, the direct physical danger for the human, the moral boundary completely vanished.
The respect for the animal was gone.
Exactly. Industrial whaling wasn't hunting in any traditional sense. It was mining. It was strip mining a living resource from the ocean much faster than its slow reproductive biology could ever possibly replace.
But this is where I really struggle with the history. I just don't understand the logic of the people running the industry at the time.
The business logic.
Yeah. At what point did the whaling companies look at their own ledgers and realize they were literally eating their own seed corn? Didn't they see the oceans emptying out? Mathematically, if you kill 98% of your product, your business dies. They had to know it was unsustainable.
Oh, they absolutely knew. The catch returns per ship were dropping dramatically year after year.
So why didn't they stop?
You have to understand the economic drivers at play here. The system wasn't designed for long-term ecological restraint. It was designed to amortize immense capital investment.
Right, because the boats are expensive.
Building a fleet of steam catchers and a massive floating factory ship requires millions and millions of dollars in upfront capital. You cannot just leave those ships tied up at the dock because the whale populations are dipping. You have to keep killing to pay off the massive debt to the banks.
So instead of scaling back to let the whales recover, they just stepped on the gas.
Exactly. They just utilized their technology to travel further. They operated on the fallacy of the infinite frontier.
The idea that there's always more somewhere else.
Yes. When the coastal waters of the northern hemisphere were depleted, they went to the open ocean. When those grounds were completely exhausted, they pushed deep into the treacherous, ice-choked waters of the Antarctic.
Chasing the last survivors.
They kept chasing the remaining populations, shifting from the largest species down to the smaller ones as the big ones disappeared, until the underlying math simply couldn't be ignored or outrun anymore. The whales were just gone. The industry collapsed under the weight of its own terrible efficiency.
And that catastrophic, undeniable decline forced humanity into a sudden, really unprecedented realization. We had to hit the brakes.
We had no choice.
Which leads us directly into the massive shift in global maritime law and the incredibly complex modern whaling debate.
The turning point really came in the late 20th century. The International Whaling Commission, or the IWC, had actually been formed way back in 1946.
Okay, so they were already around.
Yes, but originally its mandate wasn't conservation at all. It was essentially a cartel.
A cartel.
It was designed to manage the whaling industry and set quotas so the global market wouldn't crash from oversupply.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
But as the populations plummeted and as global environmental movements really gained traction in the 1970s with the Save the Whales campaigns, the political makeup of the IWC shifted.
More conservationists joined.
Right. And finally, in 1982, the IWC adopted a global moratorium on all commercial whaling, which went into effect during the 1985 to 1986 season.
And it worked. To a degree, right? Some populations, like certain humpback groups, have recovered beautifully. We see them breaching off the coasts again.
Yes, some have bounced back impressively.
But others are still barely hanging on. The North Atlantic right whale is still critically endangered, with only a few hundred individuals left.
They are on the absolute brink.
But here's the thing that really surprised me in the research. The moratorium didn't just permanently end the story. Most people assume commercial whaling is totally illegal everywhere now, but that's not exactly true, is it?
No, it is much more complex than a simple global ban.
Right.
The moratorium remains the central pillar of international whale conservation, absolutely. But international law relies on the consent of sovereign nations. There are significant legal realities and structural loopholes.
Like what?
Well, for instance, you have the provision for scientific whaling, which was used for decades to harvest whales under the premise of biological research, though much of the meat ended up in commercial markets anyway.
Right, I've heard of that. And then there are nations that just operate completely outside the moratorium now.
Yes. Japan, for example, formally withdrew from the IWC entirely in 2019.
They just walked away.
Because they are no longer a member state, they are not bound by the moratorium at all, and they resumed commercial whaling. Though, it should be noted, they restrict their hunts to their own territorial waters and exclusive economic zone, not the high seas.
Okay. And what about the ones still in the IWC?
You have member nations like Iceland and Norway. They continue forms of commercial whaling under specific legal mechanisms within the treaty itself.
How does that work if there's a ban?
Norway filed a formal objection to the moratorium when it was originally passed, which, under international law, means they are legally not bound by it. Iceland left the IWC, rejoined later with a formal reservation against the moratorium, and continues to set its own quotas.
So they just legally opted out.
Exactly. To give you a sense of scale, Iceland's 2026 quota allows for the taking of up to 150 fin whales and 168 minke whales.
Wow. We also have to draw a very hard line here between those commercial industrial quotas and Aboriginal subsistence whaling, because the legal frameworks and the core motivations are entirely separate.
Profoundly separate. Aboriginal subsistence whaling is regulated by the IWC, but it is not subject to the commercial moratorium.
Because it's not commercial.
Right. The Commission recognizes that specific Indigenous communities have an unbroken nutritional, cultural, and spiritual reliance on these animals that predates modern environmental law by millennia.
And these aren't factory ships strip mining the ocean. The quotas are extremely tight.
Very tight. For example, the Alaska Eskimo Whaling Commission operates under a highly regulated cooperative management system with the U.S. government. They have a 2026 quota of 93 bowhead whales, which is divided among several different communities.
And the Maka tribe as well, right?
Similarly, the Maka tribe in Washington state, whose historic treaty rights specifically guarantee their right to hunt whales, they received a federal waiver in 2024, allowing them to hunt up to 25 gray whales over a 10-year period.
Looking at the source material, this entire landscape forces a collision of incredibly difficult questions about how we navigate this today. And I want to be very clear to you listening right now, we are not taking a side here.
No, absolutely not.
We are not endorsing one view over another. We are just looking at the reality of the debate that the existence of the whale forces human civilization to confront.
This raises an important question because it is arguably one of the most ethically complex areas in all of global conservation. It really highlights how diverse, deeply held values intersect and sometimes clash.
Let's break down the sides of that tension.
On one side, you have conservationists and animal welfare advocates. They point to decades of cognitive research arguing that whales are highly intelligent, sentient beings with complex social structures.
Right.
And they argue that their populations are still far too fragile to subject them to any kind of hunting, regardless of whether it's commercial or subsistence. They believe the inherent value of the living animal outweighs any human use.
And on the other side,
You have sovereign nations asserting that sustainable, tightly managed whaling is an issue of food security, national heritage, and freedom from Western imposition. They view it as a managed marine resource.
and distinct from that commercial argument, you have the indigenous communities.
Yes. They view their whaling practices as a sacred, fundamental treaty right, a vital piece of cultural survival and community health that was historically suppressed by colonial powers.
The whale, simply by continuing to swim through our oceans, forces us to navigate the tension between a looming ecological crisis, the assertion of national sovereignty, and the deep unresolved legacy of colonial history.
It is a debate where biology, international maritime law, and cultural identity are inextricably tangled. There are no easy answers.
It really is. And, as I was reading this, it struck me how easy it is for modern consumers to sit back in our comfortable landlocked homes and condemn a country or a community that throws a harpoon at a whale, while we totally ignore the massive unseen ways that our own daily lives continue to kill them.
That's a very poignant observation.
We get to outsource our violence.
We do. We may have largely put down the explosive penthrite harpoons of the 20th century, but we have replaced them with invisible ones.
The invisible harpoon.
The threat hasn't vanished at all. It has just changed shape. And in many ways, the modern threats are far more pervasive because they are systemic. They are built into how we live.
Let's look at the present day. We are looking at a world of whales alive. But the ocean they are living in is a very loud, very crowded, and very dangerous place now. What are these invisible harpoons?
Today, the greatest threats to cetaceans are the everyday byproducts of our globalized economy. We are looking at lethal vessel strikes, for one.
Just ships hitting whales?
Yes. The sheer volume and speed of massive global shipping traffic moving right through historic whale migration routes is like building a multi-lane superhighway directly through a dense forest without putting in any crosswalks.
Oh, wow.
The whales simply cannot maneuver fast enough to avoid cargo ships the size of skyscrapers. They get hit, and they usually don't survive.
And then there's the fishing gear. The data on this is just horrifying.
It's a crisis. Catastrophic entanglement in commercial fishing gear is a primary driver of mortality, particularly for coastal species.
Like the right whales.
Exactly. To give you a sobering statistic from the data, over 85% of North Atlantic right whales have been entangled in heavy industrial fishing ropes at least once in their lives.
85%. Almost all of them.
Almost all of them. They drag this incredibly heavy gear for months, which restricts their feeding, causes deep infected lacerations, and eventually leads to exhaustion and a very slow death.
And even if they somehow avoid the ships and the ropes, they can't avoid the noise. We talked earlier about how they traded scent for sound millions of years ago. Their entire reality is acoustic.
which makes ocean noise pollution incredibly destructive.
From the ships.
From commercial shipping propellers, military sonar, and the massive seismic air guns used for offshore oil and gas exploration. This low-frequency noise physically travels for hundreds of miles underwater.
So they can't escape it.
It creates an acoustic fog. It physically masks their ability to hear each other, disrupting their communication, their mating calls, and the echolocation they rely on to navigate and find food.
They're essentially blinded by the noise.
And overarching all of this, of course, is climate change, which is rapidly shifting the ocean temperatures, altering the currents, and collapsing those dense patches of krill and prey they depend on.
It's like we've rigged the entire ocean with tripwires.
We have.
And the ultimate tragedy here is that we are finally truly understanding the mechanics of how vital these animals are to the health of the entire planet. They aren't just charismatic megafauna swimming around out there for us to look at on a whale watching tour. They're actively maintaining the biological machinery of the ecosystem.
They're essential cogs in the machine.
I had honestly never heard of the whale pump before reading these sources, and the physics of it just blew my mind.
The whale pump is a perfect example of why marine biologists now refer to whales as ecosystem engineers. It all goes back to the nitrogen cycle.
Okay, break that down for us.
Many large whales, like the sperm whale, dive incredibly deep into the dark zones of the ocean to feed on giant squid and deep water fish.
Where it's freezing.
Right. And those deep waters are incredibly rich in resting nutrients. But mammals cannot digest and process food at those extreme pressures without surfacing. So they return to the surface to breathe, and while they are resting at the surface, they defecate.
They poop at the surface.
Yes.
So they're essentially freight elevators for fertilizer.
Exactly. Their liquid fecal plumes pump massive amounts of essential limiting nutrients, specifically nitrogen and iron, from the dark, inaccessible depths, right up into the sunlight zone, the photic zone.
And what happens when nitrogen and iron hit the sunlight zone? Phytoplankton.
Phytoplankton form the absolute microscopic base of the entire marine food web. Without iron, phytoplankton cannot bloom. By fertilizing the surface waters, whales are quite literally cultivating the ocean's productivity.
They are farming their own food, in a way.
In a way, yes. More phytoplankton means more zooplankton, which means more fish, which supports the entire ecosystem. And crucially, just like trees on land, phytoplankton absorb enormous amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through photosynthesis.
So by mechanically forcing that iron to the surface and helping the phytoplankton grow, the whales are actively helping to regulate the global climate.
Yes, indirectly, they are climate regulators.
And they store massive amounts of carbon directly in their huge bodies, too.
They do. A single great whale accumulates tons of carbon in its tissues over a lifespan that can stretch well over a century. They act as massive living carbon sinks, and their ecological contribution doesn't even end when they die.
And this is the part about whale falls.
Yes. When a whale dies naturally and its massive carcass sinks to the seafloor, it creates a whale fall. In the deep sea, food is incredibly scarce. It's mostly just a slow drizzle of organic detritus.
Marine snow.
Right. But a single 100-ton whale carcass delivers a sudden, massive influx of energy equivalent to thousands of years of normal deep-sea food supply all at once.
An entire city in the dark, built on the bones of a giant.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It creates a localized deep-sea ecosystem that progresses through distinct ecological stages.
Like what?
First, mobile scavengers like sleeper sharks and hagfish come in and strip the soft tissue. Then, specialized bone-eating organisms like osedax worms literally bore these root-like structures into the massive skeleton to extract the leptin trapped inside the bones.
Wow.
A single whale fall can sustain complex communities of deep-sea life for decades.
What becomes profoundly clear when you look at the biology and the physics of their existence is that a living whale provides continuous compounding value to the entire ocean system, from the surface down to the darkest trenches.
A living whale gives forever.
Right. But a hunted whale, oiled down in a tripod, only gives its value once when it is extracted.
Exactly. And beyond their carbon capacity or their role in the nitrogen cycle, we are learning that their value goes far beyond mere biology.
The culture.
The culture. Modern science is dropping hydrophones into the water and really analyzing the data. We are studying the complex, structurally evolving songs of the humpback whales, which actually change and spread across ocean basins like pop culture trends.
Like a hit song moving across the ocean.
Exactly. We are analyzing the specific rhythmic clicks, the codas of sperm whale families, which act as acoustic family names. We are studying the unique, generationally learned hunting dialects and strategies of different orcapods.
We are proving that these aren't just biological, instinct-driven machines moving blindly through the water. They are creatures with culture.
They have distinct
They
societies.
pass down generational knowledge about where to find food and how to communicate.
Recognizing that level of cognitive complexity forces a profound shift in how we view them and how we view our entire history with them.
Which makes me want to ask you, the listener, a direct question. Think about the mechanical reality of what we've discussed today. What does it actually mean to value an animal without needing to use its body?
It's a huge philosophical shift.
It is. For centuries, human beings stood on the decks of wooden ships and listened for the sound of a whale's breath, or its song echoing through a wooden hull, solely so we could track it, sink iron into it, and turn its fat into machine oil. We listened to them to end them.
And now,
Today, we drop hydrophones into the shipping lanes. We listen to their songs to track their migrations, to understand their cultures, and to alter the speed of our massive cargo ships to protect them. The acoustic signal is exactly the same, but the human intention receiving that signal has entirely transformed.
it marks a remarkable, though fragile, pivot in the history of our species. We moved from extracting their bodies to respecting and trying to protect their existence.
So what does this all mean? When you look at the entire scope of the historical records, the biological research, and the legal battles we've unpacked today, the history of our relationship with a whale is a journey.
A very long journey.
It starts with a desperate, freezing survival on a beach. It scales up into an era of terrifying global domination where we erased the ocean's natural limits with high explosives and floating factories.
Right.
And finally, it arrives at a desperate, last-minute attempt at restraint. We proved, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that we possess the technology, the organization, and the sheer audacity to kill the absolute largest giants the sea has ever known.
We conquered them completely.
But that victory didn't make us greater. It just left us with a quiet, empty ocean.
And we must remember that distance from the violence does not mean we have clean hands today.
No, not at all.
Our modern world, the global shipping that delivers our online packages, the plastics we rely on, the energy we pull from the deep, all of these systems still heavily impact these creatures. We don't see the harpoons or smell the tripods burning anymore, but the threats are woven directly into the logistics of our daily lifestyle.
They are invisible, but they are there.
The fact that the systems of harm are more hidden today just means we must be more scientifically literate and more honest about the mechanics of our own ecological footprint.
We started this deep dive in a tiny wooden boat, feeling the water lift as the giant took a breath. For centuries, human greatness was measured by our ability to conquer what scared us, to map the unknown, and to harvest every ounce of wealth we found.
That was the old measure of success.
But if a creature as magnificent, as ancient, and as culturally complex as the whale can teach us anything, it's this. What if the absolute highest form of human mastery isn't the power to take everything we possibly can, but the discipline to know when to stop?